We have some more topics, but David, did you have something else you wanted to add on this point?
Yes, I would just like to bring up one more passage for Muslims who might want to look up what we're saying, to verify it, to make sure that we're not just making claims that can't be verified. In Sahih Muslim, one of Islam's most trusted collections of ahadith, we have, if you have the same numbering system that our versions have, in Sahih Muslim number 2286, Abu Musa, one of Muhammad's companions, is talking to the people of Basra, and they recite some of the Quran for him. And he says that the reciters of the Quran are the best of the Muslims. And he tells them to guard their hearts so that their hearts were not hardened as ours were. And then he goes on to explain that because early Muslims, when they recited the Quran, hardened their hearts, they forgot 2 surahs of the Quran. He says he could remember a little bit of them. But the surahs, the entire chapters of the Quran, were forgotten. This is not coming from us, my friends. Exactly. This is coming from your most trusted material on Islam. Yeah. And yet Muslims will tell us that the Quran has been perfectly preserved. We've seen that there are missing chapters, that there are missing passages. According to Aisha, two-thirds of Surah 33 are missing. According to Aisha herself, in Sahih Sitta, among your most trusted collections of ahadith, the verse of stoning, which should be in the Quran, and the verse of suckling, which should be in the Quran, are not in the Quran. Do you know why? Because they were eaten by a sheep. Aisha was the only one who had them written down, and a sheep ate them.
Thank you, David. I got a quick question, Sam. If someone wants to go and find a source that they can verify all of these things, of course we can go to the hadith, but the hadith is very large, and most people don't own the hadith.
Precisely.
Do you have a website that people could go to find a lot of these arguments and have the source references?
Yes. In fact, you can actually go to David and Nabil's website, answeringmuslims.com. They have a section, several sections dealing with the corruption of the Quranic text. You can also go to answering-islam.org. Once you get to answering-islam.org, you'll find a section titled the Quran. Click on it, and then there's another section, once you click on it, it's about the textual integrity of the Quran, and we produce evidence from the Quran itself, from authentic narrations attributed to Muhammad and his companions, and from various sources documenting that the Quran has been corrupted, that there are missing verses, verses that have been added according to some of the Muslims, missing surahs, additional surahs according to, as my brother said, Abdullah bin Masud. He believed that chapter 1 and chapters 113, 114 should not be part of the Quran. They were prayers, yes, but not part of the Quran. So he believed these chapters were added to the Quran. So all that data is there for your viewing pleasure, so that you can go and document and check out the references to see if we're misrepresenting these sources.
Very good. Thank you, Sam. I think it's time we move to our second topic, which is another thing that we hear often, especially more recently, that science confirms the Quran, and that's over against supposedly the Bible, which is not scientific, from these same folks who claim this. And I know there was a famous book written, was it Maurice
Bouquet, yes.
Bouquet in France,
yeah,
a doctor,
infamous, yeah,
on this subject. That's probably been 30 years ago, right? Was it maybe
was
1975?
1975.
That was sort of a watermark in this move. But I want to allow you all to speak on that. Before we do, I want to remind our listeners that we welcome your calls. Our number here is 248-416-1300. We have a lot yet to teach, but we do welcome your calls, and we'd like you to begin calling as soon as you can, because we'd love to hear from you. And so right now, let's go ahead to this second topic. Science confirms Islam. Which one of you want to tackle this first?
You want to go first, Brian?
Well, I guess I can introduce the topic.
Very good, Nabil.
When I was Muslim, I believed that there were some deep scientific truths in the Quran that showed that Muhammad must have been a messenger. I mean, think about it. If the Quran contains science that was not known at the time of Muhammad, then how is it possible that Muhammad could have known it unless he was divinely guided? This is what I believed. But then I started looking at the claims found within the Quran to see if they actually were scientifically miraculous. And I found repeatedly that anytime someone tried to make a scientific miraculous claim, there were certain problems. Number one, the thing that was being claimed might not at all have been scientifically miraculous. It might be something that was well known at the time. For example, it is said in the Quran that the moon is like a lamp that shines forth a light, as opposed to the sun that is the source of a light. And it said, how could Muhammad have known that the sun was the source of the light and the moon is the reflection of the light? And we read the verse, and it really doesn't actually say that the moon is a reflection. It sounds to me like they're actually two different sources of light according to the Quran. But even if this were true, it was well-known science at that period of time that the moon reflected the light of the sun. Yet these were the kinds of claims Muslims are using to show that the Quran was scientifically miraculous.
Nabil, it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, that there's an insecurity about the self-evidential apologetic of the Quran itself. I mean, they're saying that the Quran is the word of Allah from the Low Azim that was sent down upon Muhammad, and it hasn't been changed, it's perfectly preserved, we don't question it. But then they feel a need to use modern-day science, which comes not from Muslim scientists, but from secular, oftentimes materialistic, evolutionary-type people. I even see this argument that, well, the Quran supports evolution, which, you know, in order to try to make it look scientific. What do you think is going on here in the Muslim community? Is it just, well, we're just anything that we can do to try to make the Quran look good? Or do you think that people really believe, like, for example, in evolution and, oh, it's in the Quran? What's going on here?
I think what people are trying to do is to vindicate the Quran. In other words, they're trying to make the Quran sound like it really must be the Word of God, and then they're grasping at straws in order to defend it. According to a modern Muslim scholar, his name is Abu Ahmad Yasir Qadi, a man whose scholarship I respect very highly. He has a book called Sciences of the Quran. On page 282, he has a footnote. And he says in that footnote that many Muslims are trying to make miracles in the Quran, scientific miracles, in order to proclaim it. In fact, he says they try to make up these scientific miracles in every third verse, as if the Quran had so many miracles in it. Even Muslims are commenting on how ridiculous some of the other Muslims' claims are, that every other verse has a scientific miracle in it. It simply does not. But when we do look at the scientific claims of the Quran, we see problems. Now, I was in medical school. I have my medical degree. I graduated not too long ago. And I used to study a course called embryology. Now, embryology is the process of human development in utero, or in other words, while the baby is still inside the mother, the process of the human development. The Quran makes many claims about embryology. There's one in particular. All of them are generally very bad claims. But one of them in particular probably would have gotten me kicked out of med school if I still believed it. It's this one, chapter 86 of the Quran, verses 6 through 7. He, man, is created from a drop emitted, proceeding from between the backbone and the ribs. In other words, the fluid that produces man proceeds from between the backbone, which is back here, and the ribs, which are here. Well, we know, scientifically speaking, this is entirely inaccurate. This is not where that fluid is emitted from. It's emitted from the pelvis, which is at the bottom. The bottom. It's the hip, the point where the legs connect, the pelvis, the hip region. This is where the seminal fluid comes from. Now, what can someone say to vindicate this? The Quran says it comes from between the backbone and the ribs, at least according to the Yusuf Ali translation. And yet, people try to defend the Quran as being scientifically miraculous. What do they say about this in particular? They'll try to retranslate the words, saying it means something other than what it means. The words there are sulb and tara'ib. Sulb and tara'ib. And they'll say one is masculine and one is feminine. Therefore, what is being said is Allah creates man from between a woman and a man. That is not what the Quran says. That is not what the Quran is saying at all. And so a lot of times Muslims try to reinterpret the Quran in order to defend it. What does Yusuf Ali himself say? Yusuf Ali, in order to defend this verse, says, "A man's seed is the quintessence of his body. It is therefore said metaphorically to proceed from his loins, from his back, between the hips hip bones and his ribs.